Matthew chapter 6, Sermon on the Mount. Last time we talked about the idea of humble generosity, where I don't think Jesus meant this literally. Your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. Now, it's that there are times when it almost sounds like Jesus is saying, hey, don't think about this too much. Don't process it too much. And I kind of wonder if that might not be a good idea. Learn to be generous by nature. But the bigger point is, it's not about who sees you do what and how it looks and how gratifying it is to you. Because if that's what it's about, then the only reward you get is that temporary, I would even say momentary gratification. And then he goes on. I'll say it again. I kind of have to look pretty hard for any transitional connection from one idea to the next. Well, let's read. This is beginning in verse 5. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they've received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. There's a transitional connection there. It's about don't do it to be seen. Don't give to be seen, and don't pray to be seen. I have many, I won't call them convictions, I'll just say many opinions, and strong ones, about prayer. And I don't want to bend this into, my own pet peeves, but Jesus is talking about a pattern, a habit, a practice that the pious Jew often had, which was to pray flamboyant, maybe poetic, and I believe in their own eyes, they thought they were being prophetic with these very pious prayers in the synagogue and on the street corner. Now think about this. Jesus was not saying don't pray in church. He wasn't even saying don't pray on the street corner. You can pray anywhere. What he was talking about, again, was motive. Here's my peeve. Ever since I was a little boy, public prayers were less talking to God and more talking to the people around us in the moment. How many times have you heard, and I have myself been guilty, but at the close of a sermon, the preacher prays, and he basically prays through all of the points, major points, all 37 of them, of his message. It's not so much communicating with God as it is reiterating the sermon. Not a fan of it, and I tried to weed it out of myself. Since I was a kid, it prevails. When someone is asked, called on, or volunteers to make a public prayer, it almost becomes competition in the sense that the prayer is not it sounds judgmental, but it just sounds to me like they're most often trying to have this deep and again poetic, often praying in King James. They don't do that so much anymore, but boy, did they ever when I was a kid. That thou wouldest. And you know what? If you think in King James, that's how you ought to pray. But most of us don't. So what's the point of prayer? The point of prayer is my sincere and open heart, maybe distressed, maybe deeply distressed, or maybe wildly euphoric, but it's from my heart and from my mind. I think too often public prayers, and again, I have been guilty of this, they tend to project the idea of how theologically intelligent I am as the prayer. I'll demonstrate it with my wonderful spoken public prayer. You know what? If that's not what Jesus, if I get it, and I think I do, that's what Jesus was saying. I don't want that. Don't be like hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners. Why? Why do they love that? Because they get seen. And what's hypocritical about that? Well, could be a lot of things, but pretty strongly indicated here that they can live in whatever way they want to, but when they stand and pray, the facade is me, I'm so Godward in my life. I'm so, don't be a hypocrite. What he said is, when they do that, they have received their reward in full, which is, again, it's the same reward as this the what's the word I want to use here? This, when they give, they want to be noticed, right? Okay, it's, so when they pray, they want to be noticed. You see a pattern there? Well, here's how Jesus says, this is how you solve this propensity that most all humans are going to have. In verse 6, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who's unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. I don't think Jesus is saying, so we're not going to do these public prayers. Well, no, that's not what he's saying. And oh, by the way, that's not what the apostles got from it. Because we read of, in the book of Acts, the apostles praying public prayers. But what's the point that Jesus is trying to make? Well, it's not the verbiage. It's again, which I read into on the giving thing, the humble generosity. And here, what Jesus is indicating, the kind of prayer that he says he wants us to be praying is genuine, sincere, humble from the heart. Get away by yourself so that it is private and personal. Do all prayers have to be private? No, but all prayers ought to be personal. One of the changes I've tried to enforce on myself for public prayer is I think of who is here, what our needs are. And so instead of, and this is the old me, thinking of how many impressive ways can I verbalize and articulate what I think here. My challenge is, how do I cut it back? How do I just present the need? A couple of quick things. I don't need to tell God the psychological implications and impact of what's going on. He already knows. Okay? Second thing is, I don't need to rephrase what I think everybody else is thinking. That's not my job. I also don't need to articulate and phrase the what I think they need to reinforce and reiterate some positive thing. Although, that's not evil. We need that kind of help. But how simple can I make it? Look, in fact, Jesus goes on and he says in verse 7, and when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Ooh. I have been a babbler. But I try not to be these days. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Now, this points up or I think brings up, implies a question I've not struggled through yet. I'm still in the process of struggling. If God knows what I need before I pray for it, why should I be praying? Or maybe the best prayer I can pray is, Lord, you know what I'm feeling, you know what I need. Just please take care of it. I don't think that's a bad prayer. I also don't think it is maybe the only prayer that I need to pray, because prayer is about asking God to provide or do for me. It is, and that's not wrong. That's not even selfish. It's part of God's provision for us. But it is not necessary. Well, first of all, I don't think I can change God's mind. He knows everything. There's nothing that I can bring to him, no new information that would change his perspective. No. Now, sometimes I get the impression that the teaching is, well, God is just waiting to give you what you want until you ask him for it. Yeah, and I'm sure that's true sometimes. But if he already knows what I need, maybe there are times when he knows what I need and he gives me this privilege of telling him what I think I need, with me already knowing that he knows, but I get to articulate it. And I think for me, one of the big things on that is I have this privilege of a personal communication with him. Excuse me. We get to have this conversation, and I'll be honest with you, it always, to me, I can't think of a time that this is not true, feels to me a one-way conversation. I don't pray. I wish I have heard of people who, when they pray, they get this feedback from God. That doesn't happen for me. I wish it did. But the privilege is to humbly and sincerely talk to God. Okay. There have been long, very good, some books about prayer. So I'm not going to be able to wrap it up and tie a bow in the 15 minutes and 20 seconds here. But there's more we're going to think about next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.